So, Naushad Saab, welcoming you first of all. Thank you very much. And what more, I'm Karthikeya Bhai sitting here, Yatindra Bhai is here, all of us are here. And such a pleasure to have you. So, let me just start. Greetings from AMA. We welcome you all to this 42nd VIKRAM SARABHAI Memorial Lecture to be delivered by our distinguished guest, Dr. Naushad, Forbes. Co-chairman, Forbes Marshall Private Limited. Dr. Forbes will address us on a very, very pertinent and important subject, Can India Lead? Dr. VIKRAM SARABHAI left us about a half a century ago. The institutions which he built and nurtured still continue to remain exemplary examples of programs and activities which have a far-reaching impact on humankind. AMA has had the good fortune of a very close association with him when he nurtured AMA in its formative years for nearly 4 years as its president. The Indian Space Research Organization, which he founded in Tumba, has given India a predominant place in international space programs, and India soon will be recognized as one of the rare nations which is experimenting with human mission in space. For all of us, Dr. Sarabhai will be remembered for the direction and the spirit on which he founded the Ahmedabad Management Association. He was an eminent institution leader, and several of the projects and institutions that he built demonstrated his pioneering management movement and applied industrial research. Today, we remember this great visionary by organizing the 42nd VIKRAM SARABHAI Memorial Lecture to be delivered by another great contributor in technology management and efficient industrialist, Dr. Naushad B. Forbes. Dr. Naushad is the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, India's leading stream engineering and control instrumentation company. Forbes Marshall has consistently ranked amongst India's great places to work. Dr. Forbes was an occasional lecturer and consulting professor at Stanford University from 1987 to 2004, where he developed courses on technology in newly industrialized countries. He received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degree from Stanford University. Dr. Forbes is on the board of several educational institutions and public companies. Dr. Forbes has long been an active member of CII and has chaired the national committees on higher education, innovation, technology, and international businesses. He was president of CII and chairman of Governing Council, National Institute of Design. Today, Dr. Forbes will be delivering his lecture on Can India Lead, a subject of great importance for India and a subject befitting Dr. VIKRAM SARABHAI's deep and outstanding vision. We are thankful to Dr. Forbes for agreeing to deliver this lecture amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. With this brief note, may I request our respected Dr. Forbes to deliver the 42nd VIKRAM SARABHAI Memorial Lecture. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Malai, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All my friends in Ahmedabad, my friend Yatindra, it's great to be with you. It's a pleasure to be with you at the Ahmedabad Management Association. I feel greatly privileged to be giving this 42nd VIKRAM SARABHAI lecture. Ahmedabad and India are so much richer for the vision and generosity of VIKRAM SARABHAI and the SARABHAI family in general. The city is remarkably different. I've had the good fortune of visiting the Calico Museum twice. It's one of my favorite museums anywhere. I've had the good fortune of visiting many of the institutions that owe their origin to VIKRAM SARABHAI and his vision for the country, both educational institutions, scientific institutions. The topic I've chosen to speak on today is Can India Lead? The question, of course, is lead what? And the answer is the world. Now, this is a very broad topic, And so I intend to talk for around 30 or 40 minutes and leave good time for question and answers. The question first would be, why do we need leadership? Why do we need anyone to lead the world? And I think we only have to look at the current situation that we find ourselves in. Look at the whole situation in dealing with our current COVID health crisis as a world. It's so muddled and conflicted. We have a fully international health crisis, one that affects all of humanity and has, what has it seen? It has seen country after country retreat inward, close itself off, and indeed try to capture resources for itself. Try to get preferential access to vaccines that are being developed, or to even restrict the export of life-saving drugs and equipment. And this unprecedented health crisis has led via lockdowns to an unprecedented economic crisis. As you know, our economy in Q1 in India dropped 24% on last year, the worst performance in our history. Many countries have seen drops of 10 to 20%. Our economy is expected this year to drop somewhere between 10 and 15%. The world by somewhere between 5 and 10%. I mean, these are massive numbers. The world has never been in greater need for coordination and coming together, and it's simply missing. For many years, for the last 3 centuries, 2 countries played this leadership role. Britain in the 19th century, the US in the 20th century. But as we know, the US has been systematically stepping back from global leadership, captured by the America First slogan. The world can't be held hostage to what happens in the US election next month. We can't rely on the US election rescuing us and giving us and restoring that leadership that the world needs when it is in crisis. So what does leadership do? Leadership sets the rules for international engagement. However vague, however imperfect those rules are, it sets the rules. Leadership, countries that lead give international institutions, whether this international institution is the World Bank or the UN or the IMF or the WHO or the WTO, the FAO, it gives them their credibility, their heft, their resources. If the country that leads the world follows the rules of these international organizations and gives them resources, that provides the international institution itself with the credibility that they need to do their job of coordinating global efforts. So that's why we need international leadership, and that's why international leadership makes the difference in how we can respond to crises. Now, can India lead the world? I believe we can in the long run. In the immediate term, I think we can be part of a group of like-minded countries that provides leadership for the world. And I think that can be an interim step along the path to us leading the world singly. So we may not be alone, but we can have this group of countries that collectively provide leadership. Japan, Germany, South Korea, Australia, Canada, Singapore, Indonesia, and India. Now, my list includes many Asian countries because that's where the action is these days. Now, when I say like-minded countries, I don't mean identical countries, but we're like-minded in that we have a shared belief in a rules-based international order, in the utility and power of multilateral institutions, and in the many mechanisms that add up to being a participative democracy. So what does it mean to lead? Well, leading the world starts with economic performance. India has been one of the world's 10 best performing economies in the last 30 years. Combined with our population, this makes us one of the world's largest economies, as you know. The precise number is moving around with the fall in GDP as a result of COVID, but somewhere between the 5th largest and the 7th largest economy in the world. regardless of what they do, a Singapore or a Norway cannot aspire for world leadership. They're just too small. And almost regardless of what we do, we will be the world's third largest economy in the next 10 years. But we must do better because we have serious competition in leading the world. As the US steps back from global leadership, we know that China aspires to take its place. China and India were both at broadly the same place in per capita GDP and in overall GDP, overall size of the economy in 1980. Today, as you would know, the Chinese economy is 5 times the size of our economy in India. We have to catch up for our own security and for the world's security. I'll return to talk about our economic priorities a little later on and diverge for a bit beyond and go beyond economics. Because beyond economics, I think we are much better placed for this leadership role in India. We are a noisy democracy. You just need to watch the nightly entertainment show that we call the news for confirmation. You know, Arnab Goswami, 3 or 4 years ago in a closing interview question to then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, asked him, he says, what advice would he give him to improve his show? And Arun Jaitley replied, I'd suggest that no more than 2 people speak at once. So we're a noisy democracy. But I think this noisy democracy that we are is an unalloyed strength for us as a country. When President Xi Jinping made his claim for global leadership in a speech, quite a famous speech that he gave in Davos 3 years ago, much was made of the fact that he quoted Charles Dickens and Abraham Lincoln. But this would not be remarkable in India because Dickens and Lincoln are a part of our Indian heritage. I studied them in school when I was going to school here in Pune. And every time I watch a new Bollywood song, I'm struck at how inclusive our culture is. We take the best that the world has to offer and seemingly integrate it all into something that's distinctly Indian. And I would add, as a result of this integration, distinctly better than anything else anywhere, available anywhere else. Our ability to make sense of various strands, to integrate and to include, to thrive on a diversity of ethnicity, community, language, this is what makes us unique. We Indians come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and we're all Indian. I like to describe myself as a Parsi from Pune who struggles to speak Hindi, who eats beef, and who reads P.G. Woodhouse, but I'm no less an Indian for all that. Now, whoever has led the world in history has tended to be open, with openness and diversity as 2 sides of the same coin. Open to begin with to trade and imports. When Britain emerged as the world's first industrial power, it accounted for an unimaginable share of world manufactured and output and trade by an aggressive promotion of free trade. In the 1850s, that small island accounted for roughly 1/2 of world manufactured output. Britain in the 19th, but open also to immigration, as the world's talent then sought to make Britain its home. In the 19th century, Britain saw many continental entrepreneurs and scientists make their home there as immigrants. The US too, until Donald Trump at least, defined itself as a nation of immigrants. And open also to diversity. You know, Silicon Valley, we are told, is built around the IC. But I think IC actually stands for Indians and Chinese, because that's what's actually built Silicon Valley. And as we aspire for world leadership, we too must celebrate our diversity as a huge strength. We should be proud of having the world's 3rd largest Muslim population, the world's largest Parsi population. This doesn't take much, by the way, and of being the birthplace of Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. We should delight in having 22 official languages instead of 1 national language, and a plurality of cuisines that makes any definition of Indian food problematic. The other foundational principle for leadership is moral leadership. Britain's policy of free trade and the US's policy of free trade were advanced not just as economically superior, but as morally superior. Britain in the 18th to 19th century and the US in the 20th century were the key advocates of openness to trade, to immigration, to technology. They were also advocates of individual freedoms, freedom of speech, of the media, of public dissent. These ideas of openness, of generosity, of immigration were never practiced in a manner that was pure or undiluted. There were many exceptions to the way in which they practiced them, but they were powerful and compelling and widespread enough to become part of a national ethos of tolerance. And this national belief system became more and more an international belief system. All this went with both societies becoming magnets for the best and the brightest as immigrants sought to make the country their new home. I recall a conversation at lunch just near the Stanford campus a few years ago between 7 leading academics and the editor of the leading German newspaper Die Zeit. The conversation turned to how American universities had achieved world leadership since the Second World War. And the editor of the Zeit suggested the man who should take greatest credit for the success of American universities was Adolf Hitler. So after the initial shock, each of the professors, 4 were in their 80s at that time, 3 of them were Jewish, started listing their older colleagues at Stanford, at Harvard, at Columbia, and at Princeton, who had helped build the intellectual leadership of these institutions in the decades after the Second World War. And the number of leading scientists, social scientists, humanists, and artists who were driven out of a hostile Europe and made homes in the US was striking, typically half of the top 10 in the field worldwide. So my point is not that we should seek to hang on to our intellectuals. That helps, but it's an obvious point. My point instead is that we should count on history throwing up enough tyrants as leaders of various countries who will drive some of their most talented countrymen to seek homes elsewhere. And a country that seeks leadership should welcome all comers. And note that we have to welcome all comers, not just to pick the best and the brightest. Today's unimpressive Russian or Iranian or Venezuelan or Rohingya or Bangladeshi student might tomorrow create a Google or win a Nobel Prize or write a bestseller. So I think we're well placed to provide the openness and diversity that can lead to global leadership. And our diversity and tolerance enables us to lead the world in a manner which is distinctly liberal and distinctly Indian at the same time. Let me turn next to leading the world economically, because a country that leads the world must do so economically. The Economist did a survey of the Indian economy in June 1991, a month before the reforms were kicked off, in which it said nowhere in the world is the gap between what might have been achieved and what has been achieved as great as it is in India. That's a very sobering statement. And isn't it great that in these 30 years, so much has changed that today no one could make that same statement. I think it is good to remind ourselves of an India that's been uncaged and an India that has very much been moving in the right direction. But we have to do still better. We have grown since 1991 at rates of between 6 and 7% year on year. But our growth need is not 6 to 7%, it's 9 to 10% year on year for the next 30 years. Because if we achieve 9% each year for the next 20 years, we will be in 20 years' time where China is today. And surely we must have at least that aspiration of matching China today in 20 years. So to lead the world economically, we have much to do to grow at that speed. But Indian industry also has much to do because Indian industry has to be the growth driver of the Indian economy. And I'd like to talk next about the priorities for Indian industry. For India to lead the world, Indian industry has an essential role to play. If you compare China and India, the big difference is in the role of the state. In China, the state has played the key role in development. It shows the way, it directs the economy to perform, it decides where to invest. In India, things have been very different. Our growth since 1991 at least has been private sector led. The critical reforms since 1991 have been to get government out of the way such that private industry could perform. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Our success has been private sector led, and in the future too, it will have to be private sector led. Government policy should enable just this, trusting private industry to deliver. And the private sector must be deserving of this trust. So Indian industry must in the future be more of three things. First, we must be more international. Indian firms must increasingly operate around the world, investing in brands and markets worldwide. CII industry delegations we've taken in recent years to many, many countries, to Iran, to Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Egypt, Bhutan. I mean, if I pick just the list that I've been on, they kept giving us the strong message that India is seen as a benign force in the world. We were told again and again how welcome Indian industry is as suppliers and as investors. This opportunity awaits us across Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. For us to tap this opportunity, industry must have an open stance, and our current policy of self-reliance must not become, as it once was, protectionism. We have to be open to trade, to both imports and to exports. In 1991, trade was 14% of our GDP. By 2012, trade was 55% of our GDP. It's since fallen back to 40% last year. Trade has to become our growth engine, our growth dynamo again. The second priority for Indian industry is that we must be more technology focused as we invest more in R&D. For various historical reasons, Indian industry is more scale and skill intensive than in other countries at our level of development. Industrial success thus requires significant investment in R&D. Otherwise, manufacturing will continue to remain stuck at the 15% of GDP that it has been at for the last 30 years. Indian industry's investment in R&D is about 0.3% of GDP, compared with an international average of 1.5%. So we need to expand our investment in R&D fivefold to match the global average. Together with more investment by Indian industry in R&D and design, the state needs to scale tenfold investment in public research done in the higher education sector, which is currently about 0.04% of GDP against a global average of 0.4%. So a scale up of 5 times for Indian industry investing in in-house R&D, a scale up of 10 times of public research done in our higher education sector. I think it's only right that one of our key priorities should be one which VIKRAM SARABHAI championed so passionately through his life. Third, we should be more collaborative as good corporate citizens. For much of the 1990s and 2000s, the Indian FMCG industry grew at a rate much faster than GDP growth. But in the last 5 years, the industry has grown at less than the rate of GDP growth. This to me is a failure of inclusion. We have millions more who are eager to become first-time buyers of restaurant meals or refrigerators or hospital services or holidays or motorcycles or ready-made clothes and even of toothpaste. Industry must invest in improving the quality of schools and college education to include more and more in our growth processes. It's in our direct interest. As I said earlier, in the last 30 years, we've been one of the world's 10 best performing economies. Until COVID, every projection said we would be one of the world's 10 best performing economies for the next 30 years. I repeat, until COVID. Today, we face an unprecedented economic crisis as shutdowns to stop people interacting aim to halt spread. As you know, our GDP dropped by 24% in the first quarter. It was not only the largest drop in our history, but the highest drop in the world. And talk of recovery is valid only relative to a shutdown economy of April and May. The consensus now points to a GDP drop this year, as I mentioned earlier, of 10 to 15%. That will set our development back by 3 years. So the $5 trillion by 2024 goal now has to be abandoned. It has to be postponed till at least 2027. So this all adds up to the most painful and stressful period in memory. Unless we control the COVID virus, we're going to struggle to get our economy and country back on track. The specter of the virus haunts recovery. Travel and tourism is most directly affected, but so is retail. In Singapore, which now has the virus in control, shopping mall footfalls in September are now back to around 65% of last year, with sales of 75% of last year. And all the shortfall is reflecting an absence of tourists. Our shopping malls in September report footfalls of 25% of last year and sales at 35% of last year. So people are just understandably afraid to enter malls. The Chinese economy, as you know, has bounced back after controlling the virus. In the July to September period, it's expected to have shown positive growth, and it's now expected to indeed show some modest growth for the year as a whole. Most countries have had some success in controlling the spread of the virus or seen the curve flatten. India's rise in infections has been inexorable. So our immediate challenge is health. Here's our problem. In late March, with just 600 cases of COVID infection in the country, we initiated the world's most stringent lockdown. Strong communication then associated controlling the virus with a strict lockdown in everyone's mind. Today, we have over 6.5 million cases and the fastest spread of infection in the world. We are simultaneously opening up and easing restrictions on movement and activities. I agree with this opening up. With 2020 hindsight, the lockdowns were too draconian for a country like ours with such a large informal sector and no social safety net. So we must ease the restrictions, but we must communicate that we are opening up to restore economic activity because we went too far, we implemented badly, and we have no choice. And we need to warn people simultaneously that the virus is spreading faster and is as dangerous as before. Instead, we are hardly communicating anything. So what must be done? And let me end with this. Let me start with what we can do. Can we as citizens and companies take the lead? We are not a particularly disciplined country. Think of how we drive, think of how our parliament functions. But to halt COVID, we need self-discipline to keep ourselves and our families safe. Let's ensure that we and everyone around us, in our place of work, in our housing societies, follow those 3 strict principles of social distancing, wearing masks, and hand washing. Let's require that every shop that we enter has social distancing being visibly, simply, and rigorously followed. And from industry, maybe we can help equip our shops, and especially the smaller shops, with the kit that they need so that they can put in place good social distancing practices. We should refuse to enter any enclosed space if even one person inside is not wearing a mask. So we can do many things to bring about this discipline that we need to see all around us. Second, let data and science speak. Use international metrics of 7-day rolling averages of fresh infections and mortality to tell us how we are doing on a day-to-day basis, both in absolute terms and per million population. Learn from the best experiences in controlling the virus internationally. Learn from Germany, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea, Sri Lanka, Kerala, Dharaway. We have some homegrown successes too. And avoid simple explanations. The best democrats, Taiwan, South Korea, Sri Lanka, Kerala, have done as well as the best authoritarians, China or Vietnam or Hungary. The best countries with high population densities have done as well as those with low population densities. A Taiwan with 500 cases and just 7 deaths in total. A Vietnam with 1,100 cases and 35 deaths. Or a South Korea with 23,000 cases and 400 deaths. Or a Sri Lanka with 3,000 cases and 13 deaths. They've all done an exceptional job of controlling the virus, and they are denser countries than we are. South Korea and Taiwan have twice the population density of India. Vietnam and Sri Lanka are not very different to India in population density and even in wealth. Kerala has seen a greater spread, 135,000 cases, but has controlled mortality better than any other state. If India had controlled mortality as well as Kerala, we would have 23,000 deaths today instead of 100,000 deaths. That's a huge difference. Let's learn from all these what worked and why. So let's rely on our many good scientists and doctors, those practicing on the ground rather than in administration. Let them set policy direction, which politicians and bureaucrats implement instead of the other way around. In the 3 months to June, the union government issued 270 separate COVID orders. State governments that's roughly 3 a day. State governments between them issued another 370 orders. Some of these directives were even well-meaning, but with what effect? Many were to undo the confusion a previous directive had caused. So let science and expertise coordinate what we do, not bureaucrats. And learn from what Taiwan, Sri Lanka, and Kerala have done in using science and communication to control spread and mortality. VIKRAM Sarabhai's vision of a developed India relied on empiricism, on data, and on science being our guides. We must share that vision and use it to control the virus to get the country back on track. So to sum up and close, I believe we have a unique opportunity to lead the world, but this requires much change. First, that our foundation must be a reliance on private citizens in the private sector, open markets, and a liberal tolerance that builds on our diversity. Second, that Indian industry can play the critical role in making this India's world by being more international, more technology focused, and being better corporate citizens that include all Indians in our growth story. A wise government would follow policies that build on our unique national strengths of a vibrant private sector and unity in diversity. But as I mentioned at the end, before we can achieve our long-term dreams, our immediate task is to get a handle on our current health crisis. This requires self-discipline on our part as citizens and a national reliance on data as science as the basis for tackling this crisis. VIKRAM Sarabhai spent his life making science and empirical data the foundation for progress and development. A century after his birth, we all should too. We can then play the part in the history of the world that we all aspire for. Thank you.
So thank you very much, sir. Fantastic. I mean, it's a very overall view. I think I'm pretty sure that all of us share the similar thought process and kind of thinking, but at least what you have given us is the comprehensive way of looking at things and what we can do and what we need to do ourselves. So I think the problem is obviously so humongous that leaving it to government or leaving it to anyone and not including ourselves as part of inclusion, as you mentioned, I think it's not going to take us anywhere. There are opportunities, yes, it's going to take time. We may need to be realistic, but yes, we can do it if we start working from immediately. And that's a serious issue, yes. So I'll request, people to ask questions and make it more interactive. So to everyone.
Radhika, you are coordinating the questions, please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Already we have the first question, that is, in upcoming years, how this pandemic will impact on business?
In what time frame? What
In
was
upcoming years, how this pandemic will impact on business and jobs, and in which sector will have a greater impact?
So what we're seeing at present is that there are some sectors which are essentially back to last year's levels of output. So pharmaceuticals and chemicals, food and beverage, tractors, two-wheelers are pretty well back to last year's levels of output. Not year to date, but certainly if you take Q2, if you take the July to September quarter. Other sectors, if you take retail, if you take real estate and construction, if you take travel and tourism, they are all operating at well below 50% of last year's level, even in Q2. So they're going to take a while to recover. And that's why I made the argument that we cannot expect a full recovery in the economy unless we get a grip on the virus. Other countries, country after country, has demonstrated that it can control the virus. I don't know if we can today. It may be too late. But I would love to hear a debate about that, and a debate between scientists and doctors talking about what our options are today and what we need to do if we can control the virus, and then see that actually flow out. If we can control the virus, and if we can control the virus in the course of this year, yes, this year we will see a lot of damage to our economic output. We've seen it already. But we will bounce back next year. And we will bounce back next year in a very solid, robust way. But even if we bounce back next year, the best forecasts all say that in March 2022, we will be at the same absolute level where we were in March 2020. So in other words, 2 lost years. If we don't get a hold of the virus, then the chances are it'll be March 2023 by the time we actually bounce back. And that means we've had 3 lost years. We can't afford that as a country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. The next question is that what is your opinion on Mr. Modi as the world leader?
On Mr. Modi as a world leader? Well, you know, he has been one of our most dynamic salespeople. He has gone around the world trying to attract investment, trying to get the world's leading companies to invest in India and to make India their base for manufacture. And I can only fully both support and think that's the right thing to do. That's what we must indeed achieve as a country. Having said that, there's a gap between what we aspire to do and what we end up actually delivering on the ground. We're still a difficult country to do business in. We've made progress in the ease of doing business, but we manage also to undo good things. That good, you know, you have certain things that improve, systems that improve, and then something else that we do that makes something worse. You know, I think there are lots of people from industry online at present, and they will have discovered that effective the 1st of October, so 5 days ago, a new regulation has come into effect, which requires a tax deduction, a minor tax deduction of, I think, 0.1% or something of the turnover for any sales that you do with a company with which you do more than 50 lakhs of business a year. It has no revenue implications for the government. It's just a pain to actually administer, and it will take thousands of hours of time by every company. With what objective? This is not ease of doing business. So you have things that improve, and you have other things like this that mess things up. So I think we have to get the balance right. If we can truly deliver ease of doing business, if we can truly say, listen, we want everyone to come to India and invest as our Prime Minister has been saying to people, but everyone else in the system also supports that vision and that view, I think we can achieve a great deal.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, what is your advice for cottage industries? Like, how important is their contribution and your views on vocal for local campaign?
So there are two questions there. I'll deal with the two separately. So by cottage industry, if you mean craft industries, I think the potential is massive. One of my greatest regrets is that, we have probably as a country the world's most advanced aesthetic sense. I mean, I mentioned the Calico Museum. If you go around the Calico Museum, it is a reflection of a richness of our textile heritage that goes back centuries. And the reason it was set up as a museum, I think, is to draw that connection between our rich textile traditions of the past and our modern textile industry of the present. And I would love to see much more of those connections being made between our traditional crafts and our modern industry. Because if we can make those connections happen, we have something quite unique to offer the world. On the second point, so I would, if that's what you meant by cottage industry. On the second point on vocal for local, I have some reservations. If by vocal for local, we mean robust, resilient supply chains, I'm all for it. If by vocal for local, one means protectionism and protected industry that manufactures for the local market, I'm against it. Because I believe that we as Indian industry should see the world as our market. We should be able to compete with the rest of the world. And if we have things that come in the way in competing with the rest of the world, we should demand changes in our environment, in our cost structures, in our logistics, in our infrastructure, whatever, so that we can compete with the rest of the world. So I believe that the best way of ensuring that we have a competitive industry is to ensure that we do not protect it. So if by vocal for local, again, we mean a resilient supply chain where we sell overseas and we import from overseas, I'm all for it. If we mean don't import and protect industry so that we concentrate on the Indian market, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The next question is, to ensure we walk the talk on ease of doing business, do you think the bureaucracy needs a complete overhaul and induct people from industry at the highest levels of government, those who are not career politicians, like what has been done in the UK and the US?
So, I think it would, I don't necessarily think we should necessarily only induct people from industry into government. We should, by the way. I think it's a very good idea. But I think government should actually become a much more open system. In the previous term of this government, there was a modest initiative to bring in 12 joint secretaries from outside of the formal IAS. And there was a lot of opposition to it. I'm very glad the government went ahead and did it. We don't need 12, we need 1,000, right? We need to bring in people by the 1,000 from academia, from private industry, from NGOs. You have many people who from India and overseas are keen to participate and contribute what they can to national development. And we should draw on all of that capable talent that is keen to be involved.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Our next question, we are also streaming this live on YouTube, so it's a YouTube viewer question. That what do you think on companies leaving China and entering Indian market?
So there is a leaving China and entering India. Well, companies are looking to diversify their supply chains away from China. They're not necessarily looking to withdraw from China, but they're certainly looking, as people call it, a China plus strategy, a China plus supply chain approach. They're looking, though, very much more at Vietnam, at Bangladesh for the garment industry, for Ethiopia also for the garment industry. And I think we should be very much right there, wanting that investment to come to India. Some of it will come, especially in more sophisticated engineering areas. It will come, and I think Indian companies will participate in global supply chains to a larger extent than now. But there are many areas where we have opportunities, where other countries are ahead of us. And I think we should really benchmark why it is that Vietnam is attracting so much more investment of firms moving electronic assembly out of China than we are. Firms moving garment manufacturing out of China and textile manufacturing out of China than we are. I think we should ask those questions and really then see what we do to address it.
Thank you, sir. The next question is on what should an 18-year-old focus on right now to contribute in making India a world leader? So,
well, first of all, I really envy you being an 18-year-old. But you know, it's a great time to be young, because there are opportunities all over the place. And when you have a crisis like the one that we have now, it's an opportunity for a reset. Things are in flux, and when things are in flux, one can change. So the recommendation I would make, and which is what I would always say to anyone, is you should do what you enjoy most. You should do what you have passion for. So don't worry so much about doing something that, you know, that everyone tells you this is the field of the future. Is it something you enjoy? If it's something you love, you should do it. It doesn't matter whether it's working with an NGO, whether it's being an artist, or whether it's going into business. If you have passion for it and it's something that you love, you should do it. Because if you do it with love, you'll do it well. And if you do it well, you'll be just fine. You'll succeed at it. So chase your passion would be the first comment I'd make. In terms of where you can really contribute to making India a world leader, we're a huge country. We're a country that needs everything. So we need great advances in healthcare. We need great advances in education. We need great advances in industry. We need great advances in R&D. We need it all. So pick your passion and then see how you can connect your passion and what you're really keen on with opportunities to contribute in the country.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, how can we increase the scientific and reasoning of our youth and train them for efficiency and target wastage of public investment? Do you suggest any compulsory training by Indian Defence Forces for at least 2 weeks for every citizen, help for doing it so?
So, I don't know, I'm not sure if the training by, first of all, I'm not sure the Defense Forces would want to train everyone for 2 weeks. But if what you mean is how do we gain a sense of discipline? You know, I think it's by actually communication. It's by pointing out why something is in our own individual self-interest. The points that I was talking about in terms of, you know, what we need to do to control the virus, those things are well known. We need to keep repeating them, and we need to keep providing the science behind them. So, for example, why does social distancing matter, right? What is it that we know? We've learned a lot in these last 6 months about how the virus transmits. We should share that knowledge, and we should share it in a way that each person on the street can understand it, then they will decide for themselves that yes, it makes sense to wear a mask. It makes sense to keep 6 feet between me and the next person. It makes sense that when I go into a shop or an enclosed space, I should limit my time. If you can use science and you can communicate in an effective way to actually enable people to make the right decisions, I think, for themselves. I don't know about, getting the army to train all of us. I'm not so sure about that idea.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, please advise what India should do to enhance the global competitiveness in terms of quality and cost of the Indian products.
So there's a short answer there, and it ties into my trade question, trade point earlier on. The best way of ensuring that we're competitive is that we shouldn't have the choice. In other words, if imports are freely available, we have to be competitive. Otherwise, we won't exist. That's the best way of ensuring we're competitive. So if, for example, we decide that, as we have just now, that we should make, most of our compressors that go into our air conditions are imported from China. And there's this move just now that we should make compressors for our own Indian air conditioning industry. And it's not a small industry. The Indian AC industry is the second largest in the world. So scale is not the issue. But then how do we become competitive in making our own compressors? So there's a tariff that the government has brought in to encourage the local manufacture of compressors. Fine, I'm okay with that. But the tariff should have a sell-by date. In other words, there should be a clear defined time in which the tariff will go away. So in 5 years' time, import of compressors for AC should be completely free with zero tariff. And if we have a tariff as we do of 25% today, then it should be 25% and then 20 and then 15 and then 10 and then 5 and then 0. If we have that kind of a time frame to look for, industry knows that it has a limited period in which it has to invest and get competitive at global scale. Then there's no choice. And then credibly, regardless of whether industry says it's ready or not, one has to follow that schedule of tariff reductions.
Thank you, sir. There are many questions popping out, but due to paucity of time, we will take only few of them.
Sure. You want me to try? You want me to try to read some of them? And
I can read it out. I don't have any issue, sir. So we can go for the next one if you want, sir. The next one is, what kind of leadership does the world need in the present times, and how, according to you, sir, is India's potential to lead the world in the present crisis?
that was the topic of the lecture. So I will happily send over a written text, and you can you can read it again.
Yeah, sir. So we can have the next question, the last one for the lecture, sir, if it's okay. The next is economical success is the same as success in making people happy and healthy?
So there's this big debate on happiness, and there's there's been a big move over the last, maybe now the last 20 years or so, of measuring happiness in societies. And there's Bhutan is a country that measures gross national happiness and so on. It's all fine. But if you look at the correlations are very strong between GDP, wealth, and happiness. So by and large, happier countries are richer countries. There are exceptions, right? For some reason, France is a very rich country that is quite unhappy. It's probably got something to do with the French psyche or something like that. But by and large, there's a correlation between happiness and wealth. The countries that are really off the charts on happiness are actually the Scandinavian countries and Switzerland. And I think there's lots to learn from how they've organized their societies, because they are wealthy countries, they're countries that are fairly equal, They're countries that worry constantly about not leaving any people in society behind. They keep tweaking and working on their education systems, so everyone is included in their growth process and success. I think there's lots to learn from those experiences. Other countries, South Korea was relatively unhappy, has become much happier in the overall charts. So there's a significant correlation between economic success and happiness. It's not a perfect correlation, but there's a very significant correlation. And our goal should be to be both, to be richer as a country, to be more equitable as a country, and to be happier as a country. And I think those things go together.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll end the Q&A here. I'll pass on the session to our Vice President, Mr. Divyesh Radia.
Hello all. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Naushad Forbes, for having consented to deliver the 42nd VIKRAM SARABHAI Memorial Lecture on a very, very relevant topic, and that too in these trying times. I'd also like to thank our past President and Governing Council member, Mr. Yatindra Sharma, who was instrumental in getting Dr. Naushad Forbes to deliver this VIKRAM SARABHAI address. So you gave very relevant facts about India. I liked your term, noisy democracy, basically, and how our diversity can help us in terms of religion, languages, cuisines, and so on. And also you emphasize the roles of the international leadership roles for international institutions. And finally, yes, we have competition for leadership from different countries. And you really lucidly listed our priorities that include the investment of R&D by industry, the investment of R&D in the higher education sector, the public investment, and most importantly, the collaborative roles in industry, which can be a synergy and our priority to upgrade our healthcare services. And a very important point about ease of doing business, which is very relevant. And you gave a classic example of the TCS, which is absolutely a futile exercise. And I know today afternoon also many of our friends were discussing this, and there is absolutely no revenue. And even the circulars were so confusing. So how, a small thing can be messed up, I'll say something like that. And yes, in our trying times, it's very important for the discipline you highlighted. And sir, once again, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I'll also acknowledge the presence of Karthikeya Bhai SARABHAI, who's always there on the VIKRAM Memorial Lectures, and is also a member of our Governing Council. Thank you so much, Malay Bhai, for officiating this meeting. And finally, all the participants, we had over 80 participants today, and the wonderful and very relevant questions we had, and your wonderful responses. So once again, thank you all. Malay Bhai, Karthikeya Bhai, you want to say anything, please?
Yes, thank you so much, sir, from my side, and it's a really privilege and pleasure to have you, sir. So we'll have more opportunities to interact, and we'll obviously somehow steal some time from you in future as well. So if Karthikeya Bhai, you want to say something, then please.
Very nice, and thank you. And I think AMA is really a vibrant organization compared to generally management associations. So normally so many young people come together. Just now it's transformed itself into this new world. But I think what AMA does well is that the ideas which you have spoken about can form the basis of further dialogue, and how we can take those ideas and implement them. So I think that would be my suggestion, that we use this lecture as a starting point for dialogues, maybe do a workshop or something to take these ideas and see what actually can be done. But thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well taken. Point well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much once again. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.